And so we're going to begin by asking Marianne Slowinski to start and talk about that. She has been a member of a table that we have in the ELCA. She's going to talk a little bit about that as part of her experience. Marianne?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Marianne Slowinski. I am the Senior Director for Building Resilient Communities. And thank you so much, Keith, for inviting me into this gathering. So before I share some example, I think it's important to just step back just a little bit to because it's important for us to kind of acknowledge the changes that's happening with the ELCA, especially in the future church configuration or redesign, and how this redesign really kind of change and pivot in the way that we are thinking about sustainability in our work. So I would like to talk about that, and then afterwards I'm going to talk a little bit about the unit in which and the team in which I oversee, which are World Hunger and Lutheran Disaster Response, and provide some key resources and information on all of the work that we are doing related to Care for Creations. And then lastly, just kind of offer up as part of me being part of the team of Service and Justice, also share some insights related to advocacy work and the new configuration of our sustainability table called Creation Care Network. So I'll go ahead and pretty much just remind folks that back in 2020, there was a big shift from the ELCA churchwide office in which there is a decision by our leaders to realign the decision-making, ensuring there's more accountability and leadership where suited best, to make sure that we operate in a more agile, flexible, and speedy ways. And that's very key when it comes to the redesign of the church to become more forward-looking in attracting new, young, and diverse communities here in the United States. And so for that reason, what was once domestic mission, global mission, mission advancement, has now become a shift from being geographic to becoming more purposeful. And so what I mean by that is, while the Office of Operations, where the Office of the Bishop, the Secretary, and the Treasurer are now housed in their one home area, there's also now a home area dedicated for innovation. There's a whole area now that's dedicated towards Christian communities and leadership. And lastly, there is now a home area where I belong called the ELCA Service and Justice, whose purpose is really to foster and facilitate the ELCA's engagement in service and promote efforts to call and act for justice. In practicality, that means within that home area, we now have 3 even more purposeful teams that no longer believes in international and domestic, no longer believes that there needs to be segmented between how here in the United States, where we're serving our constituents, we're serving the people that we care about, we serve, the most vulnerable, that there should be more intersectionality between the mission that we serve globally and now the mission that we serve here domestically. And so within that, we've created 3 purposeful teams, so to speak, to achieve those goals of serve and to promote justice. One is called Witness in Society, which is another way of calling our advocacy work. So it's the ELCA advocacy. There is around the accompaniment of peoples, communities, and network, where our goal is to walk alongside churches, both in the United States and beyond, in fulfilling their diaconal ministries. And then the last team is where I belong and what I oversee, which is the Building Resilient Communities. So Building Resilient Communities provides both the sustainable development and the humanitarian response ministries of the ELCA. This is another way of saying that the whole ELCA World Hunger, International Domestic, and Lutheran Disaster Response International, NUS, are now part of this one team, ensuring there's more integration on the work that we're doing, in the learnings, in the resources that can be available for everyone. And with Creation Care, this is one key example of where we are really seeing the fruits of having this more integrated work, a more combined understanding, and opportunities for engagement. And so with that, I would like to share with you a couple of videos. One is just to remind us of the value and the importance of the work we do when we do feel strongly about environmental justice. And so this video, some of you may have already seen, so my apologies, but for others, this might be the first time, and I hope it will inspire you just as it's inspired me having seen it.
As members of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, we are called to be God's hands in the world. Whether it's caring for our neighbors, protecting our children, or seeking justice for the most vulnerable among us, it's our duty to go out in the world and change it for the better. We live these values every day. Our Lutheran Disaster Response and ELCA World Hunger Program serve communities near and far. We are a church that rolls up our sleeves and gets to work.
Spent many summers working at a Christian church camp in North Carolina. And on the first week of camp, we brought in more than 100 youth from an urban setting. And during that week, we took them out to the mountains. And as we approached the first waterfall, I heard a youth gasp, and I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "I've never seen a waterfall." If we want to sustain those experiences and maintain those natural settings, we need to have a conversation about how we can care for them. And God calls us to be a part of that story, to work for change, to care for all that God has created.
By not being good stewards of what we have, then the impact or the consequences of those natural disasters can be bad. We need to always be aware that those things are going to happen, and we should always have that spirit of cooperation to help our sisters and brothers.
Studies have shown that congregations where pastors talk about climate change have people who are more likely to engage in taking care of creation and to advocate for climate solutions.
I think it is our duty to love the world that God gave us, because in faith we practice loving each other, but also loving the world as well.
God gave us a beautiful world, and it's my responsibility to care for it, protect it, and leave it better than we found it.
Congregations are already doing a lot. They're putting solar panels on their roofs. They're looking for ways to reduce their carbon footprint and use less energy. They're planting community gardens. They're cleaning up waterways. But you know what? We can do more.
The ELCA is partnering with Eco America's Blessed Tomorrow program, a faith community and initiative that empowers climate action and advocacy. The partnership helps us strengthen our climate leadership, infusing it into all of our aspects of our church.
You can take action today. Get involved with ELCA's Creation Care programs. Talk about climate change with your families, friends, colleagues, and local congregations, and inspire others to do what they can to protect our climate and this world that we call home. Together, we can truly be God's hands in the world. Please join us.
So that's one piece. And you can find that video and I will have a lot of kind of resources that I will be sharing in this presentation. But this one is actually very critical. It's called the Justice Portal, and you can find it on the ELCA website under, the publicly engaged church. And so within the Justice Portal is the environmental justice, where the advocacy piece that I just shared can be found, as well as plenty of resources for congregations, including our social statements, Lutheran Restoring Creation, and the sustainability page, A Pathway to a Resilient Future, which is something that I would talk to in a moment. And so that's the piece on the advocacy and through Witnessing Society. Now, moving on to World Hunger and LDR, we have a lot of resources that is available for everyone to use. And so here are kind of like the World Hunger resources, but I kind of wanted to bring your attention first to this Climate and Hunger Toolkit. If some of you may already know this, others may not, but this is one of the resources that was developed by our hunger education team, and can be used by anyone in the church, anyone in the congregation who would like to talk about climate change with their constituents. It's a very easy to use tool that has the open liturgy, prayer, hymnal suggestions as an opening, and then just various games, and that can be both for children and adults, that is available, either for a short amount of time or for a longer time. So this is really up to you and what you see fit. It's a free resource that we have here for the ELCA World Hunger that we do want to highlight as well. This video, this might be the one that I just showed. I don't like we should get this. Okay, this video that I'm sharing next is called Seeds of Change in Malawi. This is one of the works that we're doing through the generous contributions of our Lutheran constituents in promoting agricultural input effort in a way to adapt to the changing climate. As we all know, many in Eastern Africa is now experiencing drought. And so it is more important now than ever to support cooperatives, farmers groups in ensuring that they have the tools, the techniques, the trainings in farming for not only for their own consumption but for livelihoods as well.
Welcome to Malawi. I'm Christopher Nkoma, and this is my father, Omex Nkoma, and this is my sister, Everest Nkoma, and my young brother, Tokzan Nkoma. And we are happy to see you in this village.
Ndiye ndimatenga nawo mbali pa chitukuko cha livelihood. Sinthirapo moyo wanga chifukwa ndisanalowe mbungweli ndinalovutika kwambiri. Chifukwa ndilalibe kupeza chakudya sichinene chikuonera chifukwa chimathera padera. Chifukwa ndimangolima chimanga chokha.
In 2012, my mother died. It is a challenge to me because my sisters and brothers are too young. They cannot cook on their own, so they are just assisting me to do some other chores while I'm cooking.
I've been having problems here. Apologies for the pause. Okay.
Our family, most food we eat, we eat only sima. Sima, it is made from a maize flour. We eat only sima maybe for 12 o'clock, and from that we eat another sima for 7 to 8 as a supper. Let us pray. Thank you, Father, for giving us a wonderful day today. As you can see, some of us were not seeing the light of today, and we also thanks you for giving us a wonderful food. Before we started, we call your spirit to bless this food as we are eating. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Tsopano ndilalowa mbungweli ndimapeza kuti ndimalima mbewu zosiyanasiyana monga mpunga, chimanga, soya, mbatata yokholowa, sawa. ndinazipeza kuti zinthu
I'm gonna stop there now because it is 5 minutes long and I know I don't have that much time. But this video is part of the global farm challenge that we have that is ongoing right now. Because the youth gathering was canceled this year, the ELCA World Hunger decided to instead promote a global farm challenge to invite young people to learn more about farming and how it affects the environment, because ending hunger isn't just about food, it's about opportunity, it's about supporting small farmers. So this is an educational piece, but as well as a way to support and raise funds for sustainable development work in countries around the world. So this is the tools that we have right now, and it's ongoing throughout the summer. And lastly, I just wanted to also share a couple of information about, I'm so sorry about this. About Lutheran disaster response. Every year we issue an article called Thrive, which really shows about the impact of your contribution to Lutheran disaster response. Many of the information that you will find here are highlights from what we have achieved throughout the year. And so this is the information from 2020. We have the 2021 coming out this summer. And in here you can see all of the disaster response on issues that are just becoming more frequent and intense, specifically storms. But also we talk about places of hope and opportunities for resiliency and how communities are really trying to come together and prepare for the next disaster. So I think this is a really good source of information that is available for you as well. And lastly is every year we also put together, twice a year we put together Lifelines. Lifelines provides, again, information of all of our work related to ending hunger around the world. Many of these really is both domestic and international, and talks about how we can continue not only to provide nutrition and organic food to people in our neighborhood, but also provide more community gardens and greening initiatives in our work. And so all of that is also available in the Lifelines that comes out in the spring and in the fall. With that, I will probably pause and have Bishop Devariki to share, and then if there are any clarifying questions, I'd be happy to share that as well. Oh, sorry, one more piece that I forgot to mention is about the creation care. Sorry about that. I do wanted to make sure that I mentioned that because it is actually pretty key. Really quick is that, as mentioned earlier, the sustainability table is now moving towards a network called Creation Care Ministries. I'm sorry, it's just difficult to share my screen right now. But the idea here is to bring many of the various ELCA ministries, both within churchwide and outside, within the ELCA ecology, such as the outdoor ministries, the universities, the schools, many of our citizen congregation to really share each other's work around creation care and many of the environmental justice that's going on in our community. So, this is something that came out of the sustainability table, where we really kind of wanted to be a space for sharing. And so that's something that we want to bring up again. I'm hoping like later in a couple of months, because as you know, we are trying to hire for a new director for advocacy focusing on climate change, as Ruth has transitioned on and moved to another position. So that's a very important piece that we wanted to share, because one information from that Creation Care Network that we were able to produce is an assessment survey for synods and congregation who wanted to have a check and see and have like this inventory of how many of their work related to climate change can be put together and figure out all the missing gaps and identify areas for opportunity if certain citizen congregation or church members are interested in doing some kind of either advocacy work or planting trees or anything related to creation care. We've developed tools through that sustainability table that we would also like to share to folks, and it's available on the website that I just showed called the Justice Portal. So I believe that's it on my end. Thank you, Keith.
All right. Thank you, Marianne. Dave, let's go ahead and have you share a few things.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you, Marianne. My name is Dave Brower-Reekie, and I work in one of the personal teams that works under Marianne's leadership. So I work with Lutheran Disaster Response in the Western region. And actually, I had the privilege of working with a woman named Sarah Kruger, who is the first of 4 Regency resiliency representatives that LDR has started to staff around the country. And so my work is actually to support her work. And our area is regions 1 and 2 of the ELCA, which is the LDR Western region. What I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about how your sustainability work and these concerns impact us in Lutheran disaster response work and what we see happening. So Keith mentioned water in his opening reflections, and let's talk a little bit about water. One of the wonderful resources you can find online, it's not a church resource, but there's all sorts of maps and graphs and information online about water. And in this case, this is the US Drought Monitor mapping for the US. It's updated every week. I work in the Western region, so you can zoom into where you live. And what this map shows you is the lack of water, and this is as of last week, right, in the West. Yellow means things are abnormally dry, which happens, but as you get a darker color all the way to extreme drought to exceptional drought in states around the West. And this is not just this year, this is part of a 20-year trend, and there's not any real end in sight. If you want to go to where you all live, Kansas right here at the bottom, you know where you live, you are not exempt from these drought patterns at all. Those of you in Missouri, however, are not having these kinds of issues, but they are a very real thing. So what does this look like in real life? Anybody here been to Hoover Dam? I never have, but Hoover Dam, as you may know, was built in the 1930s, finished in 1935. It spans Arizona and Nevada, damming the Colorado River, making this huge reservoir called Lake Mead, which gives water and power to Arizona, Nevada, California, and parts of Mexico. This picture is from 1983 when the dam was full. And this is from the Nevada side. If you look from the Arizona side, you will also, this is the same 1983 photo. You'll see the water high. At the very bottom is the spillway. So that's extra water, which flows down to be the river. And those 4 towers you see are actually huge tubes which go down to the bottom of the reservoir. And that's where the water flows to produce energy. Now I'm going to show you a picture from January. This is now Hoover Dam and Lake Mead as of January 11th, 2022, so just a few months ago. The water is down 200 feet from what you saw in that 1983 picture, and the whole dam is actually, the reservoir is about 30% capacity, which is really, really not good. Here's another picture. This one is from just this last April, so only 2 years ago. And this picture shows the lowest the reservoir has ever been since 1935 when it was first started. The water is, I say, 200. You can see the bathtub ring, they call it, that white area of rock that used to be underwater. And you see those intake towers where the water is supposed to be flowing into, but they're really low, which is why capacity. This is a problem. So you've seen in the news how California is under constant water rationing and other states as well. So what does this mean? Well, when there's no water, there's forest fires in the West. And fire is frightening. I don't know if you've ever been around a forest fire or not, but I was out hiking once and saw flames a little further away from me than this, but it's very frightening because you don't know how fast the fire is going to move. And they can move very, very quickly in windy conditions. These pictures are actually from New Mexico, what's currently known as the mega fire. This picture here and the one I just showed you were from June 1st, so they're only 2 weeks old, from a New York Times article. This is what disaster looks like. And this is forest fires caused by drought, a situation which is aggravated by climate change. So that's where the sustainability piece comes in. First of all, is how are we caring for the earth? Right now in New Mexico, year to date, 600,000 acres have already burned. That is a new record for New Mexico. They've never had that significant of a loss before. 600,000 acres is about 940 square miles, or 9% of the territory of Kansas. So that is a lot of area that has burned. It's not a natural disaster until it impacts people, right? I mean, forest fires are bad, and they are, but when people have to evacuate, like thousands of people have to do in New Mexico today, then we're talking about a natural disaster. This graph also, and then I'm pretty much through with this, but this graph shows you the fires that are happening this year. And what the graph shows you is the number of independent fire starts caught by satellite. So this is NASA data. And the burgundy line going up in 2022 shows there have been over 3,000 independent fire starts noticed in New Mexico. This is their state figures this year. As compared to 2011 and 2012, which were bad years, but only had 1,300 fire starts, as compared to all the other lines at the bottom of the graph, right? Which is what used to be normal, right? Very few fires. And please notice that that number for this year is still climbing, and the serious part of fire season is still ahead of us all. Finally, unless you think you're exempt, here's an April article from the Topeka Capital Journal, where the headline says, this fire season in Kansas feels different. It's burning more aggressively, and it's burning hotter. Your fire season in Kansas is earlier, but this kind of headline about frequency, ferocity, and the devastating results of disasters globally, as Marianne said to you, right? We no longer are talking about Lutheran disaster in the US and Lutheran disaster around the globe, because it's the same problem and the same the same issues. That little video she showed about Eastern Africa and their drought. Our daily life may be different than those people, but the conditions are the same and the impacts are the same. So that's why we learn from each other and talk about these issues together. So sadly, this drought is also infecting at least the western part of Kansas. Missouri, you're doing better with water right now, although there are all sorts of other disasters that you would encounter. Now, I grew up with Wizard of Oz, right? So when I think of disasters in Kansas, of course, I think of tornadoes. But for you in Kansas and Missouri, it's not just tornadoes, it's floods, it's straight line winds, it's severe winter weather, all sorts of disasters. And the US military calls climate change, right? The term is it's a threat multiplier. So everything we experience because of climate change is more, harder, worse, more frequent, and less predictable because of the threat multiple of climate change. Again, while our sustainability work is so important. So what do we do about disasters? And drought is just one, right? And that's what I'm working with mostly in the western part of the country, but you have your own experience of that. What can we do? Well, number one, personal stewardship, right? And I'm not going to talk about that. We talk about that all the time in our churches, styrofoam cups. You already brought up the fact that they're not recycling the cans and the boxes from lunch. Good for you. Tell them about that. Our personal practice is very, very important. But at the other end of the spectrum also is political advocacy. So one of Marianne's videos also had Amy Ruman on there. She does advocacy work with the ELCA. And our church is very active in talking to politicians about national policies, state policies, county policies around these issues. And it's really important that we all participate in that as well. You know that. Personal behaviors and advocacy. But the most important thing, we know the most important thing you can do around climate change, sustainability, and environment is talk about it. So congratulations to you, the Central States, for having this focus for your assembly and the conversations that we had. And the kind of questions that Keith asked at the beginning, right? What's your experience around environment and climate change? You know, how's this impacting your family? What are you trying to do about it? Those are the right questions. We've had 150 years of science. We don't need more science. I mean, literally 150 years we've known the dynamics of global warming and greenhouse gas emissions. And in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of conversation. We thought if we told people the science, they would do something. They have not. So, and now it's a political hot potato, right? The number one indicator of how people respond to climate change is their political party affiliation in the US. That's not to be depreciating of anybody, it's just clear. That has to do with what sources of information we're getting, what we watch, what we think is happening. We know that 70% of Americans today understand climate change to be real and something that impacts lives of those of people and plants and animals, 70%. 60% of people think it's going to impact us in the US. So we lose a few from the global stories, right? Only half of people say they actually talk with anybody about this concern of theirs. Only half. And and 3/4 of the population says they don't see it being dealt with in the media or other places. So we've got a lot of work that we can do in those kind of things. So talk about it, talk about it, talk about it. Don't try to change people's minds. Don't lecture them. Don't give them the story, but talk about your heart, your values, your hopes and concerns, and things that are working for you in your life. The other thing that's important to me, I think, is what I call the middle way. And that is, what can you do that's not just personal, as important that is, and not just national, as important that is, but what are you doing in your communities? And again, one of Marianne's videos talked about that, right? Planting trees in the neighborhoods, going to city council meetings and talking about water issues, right? Cleaning out rivers, things like that. These are all really, really important. So let me just wrap up here with 3 examples of the middle way. One of them in my work in trying to build resilient communities is I'm reaching out to a group called Elevate Energy. This is not a church group, because I'll tell you what we know is the church is not going to solve this. The church cannot do this alone. We need to take a leadership role and speak from faith, but we need to combine our work with those of others. Elevate Energy is just interesting to me. They're a group that works with low-income folks, marginalized folks, to make sure that people in their homes have clean water, energy, heat, and good sanitation. And they do so in such a way, interestingly enough, that they are training people for future vocations in these fields, and they're intentionally training people of color or lower economic status. So they are doing the work. They are trying to reverse the impacts of a history of racism and supremacy and privilege, and they are paying wages above what people normally get in the open market. So I'm very interested in these folks, and we happen to have an office here in Portland, so I'm giving them a call going, hey, well, I'd like to talk with you. You know, what do you do? And there's an overlap for us in building resiliency. And guess what? There is also an office in Kansas City, Missouri. Isn't that interesting? So I have 3 offices with these folks in the Western region, but you also have one. So if any of you want to play with me and start talking to these folks and just saying, is there overlap? Let me know. This is an example of how you do resiliency work. You talk to other people who are doing work locally. So as Mary Ann said, you can equip people where they live to respond and work together and prepare in meaningful and helpful ways. So that's one thing. Make partners, make partners, make partners. I have a little 2-minute video I'm going to show you. And this is interesting. Another thing that we can do, and another thing we can do is learn from other people. Fire in the West, the way we respond to it, prepare for it, try to deal with it, is really the result of 50 to 100 years of US policy, government policy around fire. This is a little 2-minute video, it's just a clip apart. This is an interesting thing they did in California, which was to bring Native people into the conversation about how do you respond to fire, people who have been here for 10,000 years. And so as you listen to this little short video, listen to the language used by our Native sisters and brothers around fire. Listen to the language and the way they approach this issue. I just think it's wonderful.
Fire is good, but it's also going to do harm today. We honor those plants and thank them for their sacrifice. Today, we're having the Easter, we're going to light the fire in the traditional way. That gives the fire power.
Here in California, we live in a climate where fire is an important part of that ecosystem. And the indigenous people figured that out after living here for thousands of years. And so they came up with a way of living with fire and being in good relationship to fire. Fire's alive and you give thanks to it before you bring it back to life again. And then you feed it while it's alive. You feed it and take care of it. That's kind of the relationship that a lot of people don't have anymore.
I'm just warmed by the language and the cultural perspective around our brother fire and how we deal with that. So I'm going to stop there. I particularly have gone over my time, but I just want to share with you how sustainability is important to the work of disaster response, and that we need to do this in a way that builds community, personal responsibility, national advocacy, but these partnerships in between and the respect of those who know the land that we're trying to care for. Keith, thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Mary Ann. I'm going to take a moment to see if any of you have questions for Dave or Mary Ann. Are there goals set that Churchwide has that we could understand and be a part of?
Certainly, we have the social statement, which has always been kind of our foundational document when it comes to care for creation. I've shared the Justice portal where it had the social statement is written there. So I recommend taking a close look at the social statement and kind of look into many of the call to action that is in that document. Is what I would recommend.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Thank you. So Dave, you referenced that advocacy is lobbying for climate change, about climate change and in the environment. Do we have specific statements that are written about that?
So the Care for Creation social statement, I would guess you're well aware of. That's now a relatively old statement. It doesn't talk about climate change directly. The Churchwide Council did authorize a social message on climate change specifically, and that's being created this over the summer, and that will have much more specific language. There are not goals such as what degree of carbon impact we want to reduce or those sorts of things, because that's very hard to talk about across the breadth of a church like ours, where people have if you live in North Dakota, you live in an extraction state, and your whole economy is based on what you pull out of the ground, and that's a harder conversation than if you live in another part of the country where you live by different means. So we're all dealing with racism, and I want to put that on the table in that we need to deal with how we understand people with different voices and different cultural perspectives. We absolutely have to do that. We need to wrestle as a country with the damage that we have done as colonizers, against people of color through the history and our practices. Native Americans, African Americans, slavery, etc. Those things are not gone by any means. In disaster response, we see the impacts of these patterns by the way people are treated differently through governmental policies and responses. So that's not getting to your question. Are there specific goals? There are broad scope ways in which we want to move. Resiliency is the one that we're working with right now. Embracing our diversity is one that we're talking about. And then it's up for us, I think, in our own synods to do what you're doing, which is say, how does this affect us and how does it play out here? And how can we be effective to that work here? So that may not be a satisfactory answer, but that's what I got for you.
I think one of the pieces they reference there, the advocacy office that we have in Washington, D.C., and I've worked with them and been there several times, and they have a staff of about 8 to 10 people, and someone over here might say, well, they're going to work on farm, and they're going to work on the environment, and they're going to work on this issue and that issue. What they're doing is they're monitoring the legislation, and they know which senators and which representatives are proposing and supporting each of those areas. And then they sit back, sometimes only from a Lutheran perspective, but they also sit around the table with the Presbyterians, the Methodists, the Episcopals, and some other denominations that also have representation in Washington, D.C., and they sit around and say, well, what's the position of the ELCA on this? And what's the position? And then they say, where's the common ground they have? And how could we then work together on the common ground pieces? And then go to those legislators and say, these denominations have this perspective, this position, this approach that we would like to suggest. And that's how we try to work collaboratively with some of our partner denominations and to reach out to the House and Senate appropriate people to talk about bringing our voice, our opinion, our perspective to their decision-making process. We can't make any of the decisions, but we can add that voice and perspective. And the more voices that we have from different parts of the country. So let's say I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to a particular senator, and I can say, well, we have congregations in that senator's territory that would also speak up to this. So I can use their voices to multiply the local presence around our position. So that's how the people in our advocacy office are trying to work on this. I think you can begin to see that this is not just a very disparate, it's a very integrated, connected kind of issue and kind of problem that we have, and trying to connect all those aspects and the awareness and the education and working with skills and advocacy, trying to pull those pieces together. That's the work that Dave is trying to do as he works out in the Western region. And think of Western region, Denver West, right? Regions 1 and 2 in the ELCA is Denver West. So he's got a pretty good sized territory that he's trying to help support our congregations and bring an ELCA voice to the issues within that geography.
And I would just like to add to that, Keith.
Yes.
It's not a matter of the Synod offices doing things, although that's great, right? It's what we're really trying to do is encourage the call that you already feel as members of this church, right? And you don't have to fix the problem. You don't have to get it right. You just need to do something, have conversations with people and shape your own life and share your story with folks. I tell people, are you doing anti-racism work? Great. You're doing Lutheran disaster response resiliency work. Are you doing climate work? Great. You're doing Lutheran disaster response resiliency work, right? Are you recycling cans and bottles? Great, right? So thank you for what you do. That's what I want to say. But this is all of us figuring it out together, which is kind of cool.
What do you think about automatic lawn sprinklers, Dave? Any opinions on that? Thoughts?
Yeah, pull out the lawn altogether. Do naturescape. I don't mean to be snarky about that. Lawns are a terrible use of water in most dry areas. Automatic sprinklers are basically better at using water more wisely than the hose you drag around and forget to turn off. Right. So if you're going to have a lawn, automatic sprinklers, give people jobs to install them, which is good, and water more responsibly. But out here in the West, the answer is pull up the lawn, get rid of it.
So let me bring that question, Mary, to Mary Ann. The whole concept of sustainability, Mary Ann, is there a common definition, understanding, or proposed a way to talk about that?
Sustainability in the development world, which has always been my background, is about what happens when we all step away. Will the community survive? So there's a lot of localization that needs to happen in order for sustainability to occur. Meaning, if the ELCA is no longer there, if our churches are no longer there, will the community survive? Will the community stay resilient as they adapt to the changing climate, as another storm hits, another flooding hits, when we are no longer there, when we can no longer be there, how our community is able to say, we've gotten the tools, we've got the trainings, we thank the ELCA, we thank the church, for not only the physical tools, but the skills that we've inherited. And now we feel more confident, we feel more ready to address any and all situation that's happening around our community.
And you've had some experience internationally. Have you seen some places where that level or that stage of sustainability has been achieved?
Absolutely. Sorry. One place that I always describe is what's happening right now in South Asia. For the past 3 years, we've been supporting a transboundary emergency preparedness in Nepal, Bangladesh, and India, whereby every year, due to the monsoon season, many communities by the riverbanks are experiencing flooding. But that's because the flood that starts from the north in Nepal does not provide the information and the warning for the river that crosses India and crosses Bangladesh. And so we have partnership with Lutheran World Federation and with local organizations, LWSIT and RDRS, 3 organizations that are based in 3 different countries, come together, work together with universities in addressing moment to moment when the government are unable to provide immediate information when a flooding happens, the tools, the information, the technology, so that communities are better prepared when flooding occurs. And we are now in our 3rd year, and we are already seeing the amazing results of just having the knowledge 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours before flooding happens, so that communities has an emergency route system that they can all move, especially the elderly, women, children, that has really been saving many lives because of that. And it's holistic. It's holistic in a way that flooding doesn't happen every day. So in days when it's actually the summer months and there's no rain, how do we then build this same community to put together agricultural adaptation methods so that they're able to produce vegetables, fruit, what have you, for their own consumption and to sell, that is adaptable to the changing patterns of weather. So really being proactive and providing the tools, the knowledge, so that we know that, after the 3rd, 4th year, when we need to move to another community, we know with confidence that the community organizing that happened in these villages where next to the river banks are able to survive and thrive. It's a wonderful experience and a wonderful story that you will find on our Thrive magazine that was issued last year. So yeah.
Thank you. Any other closing questions? I'll close with just a couple comments here. One, we mentioned or we've talked about what can your congregation do locally. And one of the ways that we want to encourage congregations to think about that is that the Central State Senate is providing a limited number of grants, making them available to congregations, $250 grants. I've got information on that up here. If you're interested in taking that back, thinking about it, talking to others in your congregation, please come up and get one of these. It's something you'd simply think through, talk through. I'm available to talk it through with you. And there's a place online you can fill out the loan app. And our goal here, we have a review committee in the Senate that's part of our Central State Senate Earth Charter initiative. And we would review that and hopefully get a decision back to you within 15 days so that we can then get a check to you and get started on working on whatever you would like to work on.